This video is brought to you by Mubi, an online cinema streaming hand-picked exceptional films from around the globe. Get 1 month free at mubi.com/likestoriesofold. Deep in the Amazon rainforest. Walk into any direction and you'll encounter nothing but jungle for at least 500 miles. Here, a man is making a movie. His name is Werner Herzog. The footage you're watching is from Burden of Dreams, a documentary recounting the turbulent production of Fitzcarraldo, which tells the story of a man determined to transport an enormous riverboat over a small mountain in order to finance his dream of building an opera house in the Amazon. Besides the obstacles you'll find on any production, filming so far away from civilization also confronted Herzog and his team with injuries and illnesses, hostile natives, and the aggressiveness of nature itself, which seemed intent on crushing the dreams of any man who entered its realm. But despite these hardships, Herzog persisted and finished his film roughly 5 years after pre-production began. It is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of filmmaking, and yet, for someone with a career as long and prolific as Herzog, it is but one of many exceptional tales. His cinematic adventures have led him across the globe more than once. So far, he is the only director to have made a film on every single continent. His unique approach to filmmaking has not gone without controversy. Here is a man who hypnotized his entire cast for his film Heart of Glass, who filmed his first feature films on a stolen camera, believing firmly he had a natural right to it, who runs a rogue film school where he teaches students how to pick locks and forge documents, who made 5 feature films with Klaus Kinski, an actor who was notoriously difficult to work with, who filmed volcanoes on the verge of eruption, who once got shot during an interview by what was most likely an airsoft rifle, and shook it off like it was nothing.
It's not significant.
It is because of the many wild stories such as these that Herzog has inadvertently built somewhat of a personal mythology around himself. But what I am more interested in is his work itself. After all, his films are the reason famous director François Truffaut once called Herzog the most important film director alive. To which acclaimed film critic Roger Ebert adds that even his failures are spectacular. Having watched over 40 of his films, I'm inclined to agree. There is an almost spiritual quality to his stories, and his images are filled with a beauty and absurdity that never fail to invoke a strange yet intimate sense of humanity. So today, let's review the work of this enigmatic storyteller, examine the philosophy beneath his seemingly unwavering resolve to capture humanity on celluloid, and explore the significance of the many stories he brought home from faraway lands. Let's start off with a basic question. What are Werner Herzog's films about? While Herzog has stated he doesn't consciously consider the themes in his films, and despite his insistence that film is not the art of scholars, but of illiterates, I think we can nevertheless draw some illuminating connections. Journeying through Herzog's filmography, there seems to be one fundamental conflict at the heart of his stories. They are all about the human spirit as it struggles against a universe that is inherently violent and indifferent.
There is no harmony in the universe. We have to get acquainted to this idea that there is no real harmony as we have conceived it.
We already find such a story in Herzog's first feature film. Signs of Life was released in 1968 and tells the story of Strazek, a soldier who is recovering from an injury on an island in Greece. Here we briefly see Herzog himself as one of the extras moving Strazek out of the truck. The premise is simple but clever. Herzog centers the film around a soldier, a type of character who is generally defined by a mission that needs to be accomplished, and puts him in a place that doesn't offer any real purpose or meaning. It doesn't take long for boredom to set in, and soon we are following Strazek and his fellow soldiers as they are finding increasingly strange ways to occupy their minds. Eventually, the quietness of the island drives Strazek insane, and he threatens to blow up an ammunition depot. His rebellion, however, doesn't make much of an impact and is resolved rather quickly. The story then ends with the island returning to its daily business, seemingly unaware and uncaring of the great inner turmoil experienced by this one man. This contrast is further emphasized in Herzog's second feature film. Even Dwarfs Started Small is about a group of dwarves who begin a riot against the oppressive order of their correctional institution. By assuming the perspective of people who are only about 2 feet tall, the entire world around it becomes out of proportion. It was Herzog's way of highlighting that, in his words, it is not the dwarves who are monstrous, it is us and the society we have created for ourselves. And it is within this absurdity that we as individuals struggle to assert our identities, to make ourselves understood and establish meaningful connections. It is as if there is something of an essence or a concentrated form of each of us that is screaming to get out, and that is a perfectly formed representation of who we are. Nowhere in Herzog's filmography becomes this longing more clear than in his 1971 documentary film Land of Silence and Darkness, which follows the both deaf and blind Fini Straubinger and her work of helping others like herself who experience the world in unimaginable isolation. Some of whom, like these children who are deaf and blind from birth, have never experienced real human contact. The inability to communicate is also a prominent theme in The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, which is loosely based on the true story of Caspar Hauser, who, in 1828, appeared in Nuremberg after having been held captive in a locked room since as long as he could remember. Despite the great and still unresolved mystery of who Caspar was, where he came from, and who imprisoned and released him, Herzog was more interested in Caspar himself, having no concept of the world. Herzog saw him as someone who was completely isolated from society, a being without language, trying to communicate himself to a world unable to understand him. This fundamental struggle is present in virtually every film Herzog has made. It's there in his fictional films like Wojciech, which is about a hopelessly oppressed soldier, in Nosferatu, which was Herzog's remake of the classic story of the immortal yet loveless Count Dracula, and in Strazek, where we follow a German immigrant as he chases the American dream in Wisconsin. And it's there in his non-fictional work, like the story of Walter Steiner and his dream of setting a world record in ski flying in The Great Ecstasy of Woodcarver Steiner, of Dieter Dengler, who survived a terrible ordeal when his plane crashed in the jungle during the Vietnam War in Little Dieter Needs to Fly, and of Timothy Treadwell, an activist killed by the bears he sought to protect in Grizzly Man.
Hey, you little champion. Hi. How are you?
Herzog even went as far as saying all his characters belong to the same family. Whether they be fictional or non-fictional, they have no shadows, they are without pasts, they all emerge from the darkness. I've always thought of my films as really being one big work that I've been concentrating on for 40 years. The characters in these huge stories are all desperate and solitary rebels with no language with which to communicate. Inevitably, they suffer because of this. They know their rebellion is doomed to failure, but they continue without respite, wounded, struggling on their own without assistance. Herzog's characters all remind us of our own desire to express ourselves, to make clear to others who we are, and how often we stumble and fall in that effort, how often we experience a deep sense of loneliness when we are unable to articulate our thoughts and dreams to those around us.
Was Sie sich wirklich unter den Worten Ehrgeiz, Hoffnung oder Glück vorstellen, wird uns immer verschlossen bleiben.
And so, those people on the furthest fringes of our societies, those who have been cast out, misunderstood, or been faced with incredible trauma, do not become outsiders in the films of Werner Herzog. Instead, they become saints, embodiments of the human spirit that exists within each and every one of us, longing to manifest itself. As a remedy to our inability to articulate ourselves, our loneliness, Herzog often speaks of our need for adequate images.
Wir brauchen ganz unbedingt Bilder, die mit unserem Zivilisationsstand und mit unserem Inneren allertiefsten übereinstimmen.
From here, we can turn our attention from the stories to the storyteller. Herzog laments the worn-out images that surround us in our modern civilization, the posters and postcards, the Hollywood sets, and of course, the television.
If you switch on television, it's just ridiculous and it's destructive. It kills us, and talk shows will kill us. They kill our language. So we have to declare holy war against what we see every single day on television.
In this brief documentary called Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe, Herzog taunted the aspiring filmmaker Errol Morris by claiming he wouldn't be able to make his first film, which led to a bet that Herzog lost, resulting in him having to eat his own shoe.
Oh, that's very hot.
The real point of the story, however, wasn't that Herzog had no faith in his fellow filmmaker, but rather he wanted to motivate Morris to pursue his project. He wanted to push him to think outside the box and create something fresh and original, which in this case became the acclaimed documentary Gates of Heaven, a film about a pet cemetery and the stories of the people who have buried pets there. But more importantly, the short film reflects Herzog's own quest to find adequate images. These images can be man-made. For example, if we return to Herzog's first feature film, there's one image of a landscape with thousands of windmills that according to Herzog inspired the entire film. It was like a field of flowers gone mad, he said. A landscape of complete ecstasy and fantastic madness. They can be found in people themselves.
31 a quarter, bid now, have now, 75, 175, 75, 175, 175, 31, 75, through, sold them at 31.50.
In How Much Wood Would a Woodchuck Chuck, Herzog documents the rapid language of cattle auctioneers, calling it the real poetry of capitalism. He was so fascinated by it that he even included it in his feature film Strozek, which was released the following year.
Sold it $400 in your name, ma'am.
There's a real music in the delivery of speech, the sense of rhythm these people have. It is almost like a ritual incantation. But mostly they are discovered in the unknown and mysterious places across the world. And if it were up to Herzog, he would even go beyond it.
Man muss also richtig suchen. Ich würde auch auf den Mars fliegen oder auf den Saturn mit der nächsten Rakete, wo ich einsteigen könnte.
I mean, right now, we can't even get one person to Mars, so clearly...
I would come along. I wouldn't have a problem. One-way ticket.
That sounds great.
I'll be your candidate.
Okay.
It is exactly through filming in the real world that Herzog gives his films a sense of reality that is not found with other filmmakers. This becomes especially clear in his fictional films. Take a film like Fitzcarraldo, for example. If it were any other production, the story of a man hauling a steamboat over a mountain deep in the jungle would have been designed through sets, props and scale models. But not with Herzog, who believes that the audience intuitively knows what is real and that it affects how they watch the film.
And you can tell the difference, that this is not a plastic boat and that this slope here is no joke at all.
Much of what you see in Herzog's films is indeed real. He really used hundreds of rats in Nosferatu and all these monkeys in Aguirre. This strong man really lifted 900 pounds in Invincible, and these actors really lost weight to portray prisoners of war in Rescue Dawn. This commitment to bring reality into his fictional films has led to some unorthodox directorial decisions. For the enigma of Caspar Hauser, Herzog cast a man named Bruno to play Caspar, a choice which seems rather odd seeing as Bruno was an adult and Caspar was still a young boy when he was found. Bruno, however, had a troubled past of his own. As a child, he was beaten so badly by his mother that he lost his speech, and he ended up spending the majority of his life in asylums, prisons, and foster homes. And it was this vulnerability that convinced Herzog that Bruno would capture the essence of Caspar better than any actor could have done. As mentioned before, Herzog experimented with hypnosis in Heart of Glass. The film is about a prophet who foresees an apocalyptic event in the town that declares him mad. Herzog's vision was one of collective madness, of characters who are aware of a coming catastrophe and yet continue to walk straight into it. It is this deliriousness that Herzog makes visceral to the audience through hypnosis, which put everyone except the prophet into a walking daze, turned their hearts into glass. The hypnosis therefore was not a tool of manipulation, but one of stylization, a way to emphasize the underlying story. The main point is that all of these images emit a realness that contains a self-transcendent quality. And these are precisely the kind of images Herzog is looking for, those that tell a greater story and resonate with us on a deeper level.
Give us adequate images. We lack adequate images. Our civilization doesn't have adequate images. And I think a civilization is doomed or is gonna die out like dinosaurs if it does not develop an adequate language or adequate images. I see it as a very, very dramatic situation, and that's what I'm working on, a new grammar of images.
While there is indeed a significant amount of reality in Herzog's fictional films, he seems to take the opposite approach with his non-fictional films. Those who have seen films like Fata Morgana or Lessons of Darkness know the footage isn't presented as it is in a literal sense. It is curated and fictionalized. The desert landscapes of Fata Morgana are accompanied by music and a retelling of the Mayan creation myth. And the burning oil fields in Lessons of Darkness are turned into something which feels more like an apocalyptic science fiction film.
Something is looming over this city that will soon be laid waste by war. Now it is still alive, biding its time. Nobody has yet begun to suspect the impending doom.
This stylization serves to reveal a deeper truth, to capture something essential about the human experience. And this brings us to the question of the nature of our reality and how cinema represents it. And because Herzog's thoughts on the subject are rather unconventional, we must make a brief detour to get the necessary historical context. In the early 60s, the question of how to capture and represent reality resulted in two comparable yet distinct methods for filming documentaries. The first being direct cinema, which originated in the United States and Canada, and the second being cinema verite, which was developed in France.
Ce film n'a pas été joué par des acteurs, mais vécu par des hommes et des femmes qui ont donné des moments de leur existence à une expérience nouvelle de cinéma vérité.
Both were characterized by a search for a new cinematic truth, the main goal being to create more objective and honest representations of reality, and were made possible by the development of lightweight cameras and portable synchronized sound recorders, which allowed for more non-intrusive ways of filming.
S'il vous plaît, êtes-vous heureux? N'ayez pas peur, on ne veut pas vous faire de mal.
This quest for objective realism posed a significant methodological problem, as the act of filmmaking is by its very nature a manipulation of reality, and can therefore never achieve a true reflection of it. To account for this, direct cinema argued that the filmmaker should be a passive observer, a fly on the wall as it were, and strive to capture the world as objectively as possible, and represent it in such a way that it feels as if reality is unfolding naturally before the audience.
Mr. McDonald, I'm Paul Werner. Yeah, well, what the hell is it all about?
Cinema verite has a slightly different philosophy about the role of the filmmaker and suggests more active participation in which the filmmaker is included into the film as a subjective observer, thereby making the process of filmmaking more transparent and giving the audience more insight into the relation between the observer and the observed. This method also allows for more staging and interventions, which, according to Dan Krause, a well-known filmmaker in the cinema verite tradition, doesn't contradict the goal of capturing truthful realities. He states that no documentary can ever show you the truth, because there are multiple truths, but verite can at least relay the truth as seen by a single observer. While cinema verite has been criticized for at times feeling more like reporting than artistic expression, it has nevertheless become an influential method that, together with direct cinema, is still popular today in both non-fictional as well as fictional filmmaking. Herzog, however, fundamentally disagrees with this philosophy and has a wholly different approach when it comes to capturing cinematic truth, which he, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, articulated in his Minnesota Declaration.
I would like to call it the Minnesota Declaration. Truth and Fact in Documentary Cinema, and it has the title Lessons of Darkness. And the lessons are numbered. 1. By dint of declaration, the so-called cinema verite is devoid of verite. It reaches a merely superficial truth, the truth of accountants.
When Roger Ebert first saw Bells from the Deep, Herzog's 1993 documentary on the strange beliefs found while wandering through Russia, he told Herzog how fascinated he was by the people who believed there was a city populated by angels at the bottom of a deep lake, a city that would only reveal itself if they spread themselves over the ice and peered through it, and by the monks claiming to be Jesus Christ. Hundreds of them, in fact, walking through Russia with their prophecies and warnings. To his surprise, Herzog then replied, "But you know, Roger, it is all made up. It is not real. I invented it." Indeed, as well known as Herzog is for bringing reality into his fictional films, just as well known is he for bringing fiction into his documentaries. In Encounters at the End of the World, for example, we see a few scientists put their ears to the ice and listen to the sound of seals, even though in reality the seals were impossible to hear and their sounds were edited in later. In another example, in Little Dieter Needs to Fly, we see Dieter being obsessed about making sure every door is open. Except, Dieter wasn't really obsessed about doors at all. Herzog asked him to do it. Scenes such as these may not be factually honest, and they certainly are not transparent, but they serve to communicate a different kind of truth. "I didn't know whether to believe you about your own film," Ebert wrote about Herzog's confession about Bells from the Deep, "but I know you speak of ecstatic truth, of a truth beyond the merely factual, a truth that records not the real world, but the world as we dream it."
Filmmakers of cinema verité resemble tourists who take pictures amid ancient ruins of facts.
In Herzog's remake of Nosferatu, Jonathan Harker travels to Transylvania to meet with Count Dracula. On his way, he meets some villagers who question the existence of Dracula's castle.
The gypsies have been saying that no such castle exists, except maybe in the imagination of man. It's just a ruin, they say.
Later, we are shown a shot of old ruins, implying that the gypsies were not mistaken. But then, a shadow moves over the mountain, and, as the realm of the dream covers our reality like a blanket, the castle reveals itself to Jonathan. I think the sequence serves as a fitting metaphor for the experience of ecstatic truth that Herzog speaks of. It's about an experience that lies beyond the bare stones of the ruins, beyond the accountant's truth. About that part of the human experience that cannot be captured by logic or reason, and yet still deeply resonates with our innermost selves.
So there's an accountant's truth and there's something much deeper. And you will find that in great poetry. When you listen or when you read a great poem, it will occur to you very abruptly that there's a deep, enormous truth in this poem. And you feel like illuminated. And you don't have to analyze, and you don't have to read lots of literature about this very poem. You just know it instantly. And why do you know it? Because there's an ecstasy of truth that is in this poem. And in cinema you have this as well.
Herzog's entire career is defined by attempting to create these experiences of ecstatic truth. And I specifically say create, for they are not found in the world as it is. They require the hand of a director, a poet, or an artist.
There are deeper strata of truth in cinema, and there is such a thing as poetic, ecstatic truth. It is mysterious and elusive and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization.
If we revisit the earlier mentioned fabrications, we can get a sense of how this stylization enhances the truth of those scenes. In the case of Bells from the Deep, Herzog took a fact, the belief in a lost city at the bottom of a lake, and then altered certain details of the situation to illuminate something deeper about religion and faith. That the Russian who looks to be in deep meditation was actually a drunk who fell asleep on the ice is irrelevant to that understanding. In Encounters at the End of the World, the sounds of the seals may not have been there, but the scene does invoke us to pay close attention to the strange world around us. And as to Dieter's obsession with opening doors, Herzog simply explained, Dieter does not really do that, but it is how he feels.
And they are speaking about how documentaries should be made, and we should be only like a fly on the wall and not interfere. And I just couldn't take it anymore, and I grabbed the mic and I said, no, we are directors, we are creators, we should be the hornets that sting. We go out there, and then there was a roar of disgust against me, and I shouted back, Happy New Year's, losers.
Creating experiences of ecstatic truth is not just about fabrication, it's also about staging situations in such a way that people will eventually express something genuine, something from the heart that would otherwise remain unarticulated.
Jewel, I apologize that this wristwatch is still in an evidence bag. However, I want you to have this watch.
At first glance, this scene in Grizzly Man where a coroner delivers the final belongings of Timothy Threadwell to his old girlfriend seems awkwardly artificial, until we get this moment.
The last thing that's left.
One method Herzog frequently uses to get moments like these is taking the subjects of his films back to the places where something significant happened to them and recreating their experiences as they happened.
There was a terrible moment at that point where we actually felt we were going to slip down the bank and his body would fall into the river.
After the Park Service arrived, then I'm leading them up through the alders here. This is the same trail that I had come up the first time.
Some notable examples of this include the story of Dieter Dengler in Little Dieter Needs to Fly.
They hit the water buffalo with a stick. It started taking off. I was hopping behind it. I was trying to keep my balance, but pretty soon I fell over.
And that of Julian Kupke, who survived 11 days in the jungle after being the sole survivor of a plane crash in Wings of Hope.
Genau an dieser Stelle bin ich auf den Charbonnier gestoßen.
Sequences such as these also serve to better connect the audiences to the reality of these experiences. It recalls the search for adequate images, and these images need to be witnessed firsthand.
Just a movie. Don't worry about it.
I think Roger Ebert effectively summed it up when he wrote, "I understand this. What must be true, must be true. What must not be true can be made more true by invention. Your films, frame by frame, contain a kind of rapturous truth that transcends the factually mundane. And yet, when you find something real, you show it." Now we can begin to understand why Herzog, especially in his documentaries, always seems to wander off from the factual subject by including a variety of seemingly random stories from the people he encounters. He is not interested in their facts, he is interested in their dreams.
This is a bumblebee. It was doing its duty, it was flying around, and it died right there.
I was not afraid. No, I was not afraid. It was more a feeling of powerful things and deep things. A way to understand things which is not a direct way.
Well, the bee moved. Was it just sleeping? Hey, let's go fly.
This search for the deep expressions of our innermost selves also comes with a certain amount of responsibility, for while it is important to know how to push for deeper truth, just as important is it to know when not to push.
If we can...
You do not have to talk about it.
Okay. Thank you.
What I probably admire the most about Herzog is how he, throughout the entirety of his career, always maintained a strong sense of dignity. He doesn't rely on shock or exploitation to tell his stories. In Grizzly Man, for example, a tape was found with the recording of the final moments of Timothy Treadwell and his girlfriend. And while Herzog was pushed to mention and include it in the film, which happens in this scene where he, and he alone, listens to the tape, he was adamant about not revealing its content.
You would violate the right and the dignity of the death of these two individuals. You just don't do it.
This restraint also showed itself in The White Diamond, where Herzog comes across a mysterious cave behind a waterfall. They ended up lowering a cameraman down the waterfall to reveal what was behind it. But because the cave's mystery was considered sacred to the native population, Herzog decided not to show the footage.
Well, I don't think it should be published as a whole. Say, okay, this is behind it. It would lose the whole essence about our culture would tends to die away and lose it.
It's a clear revelation about Herzog's deeper concern about humanity and the dreams that define us.
We are losing riches and riches and riches, and we lose cultures and individualities and languages and mythologies, and we'll be stark naked at the end. We'll end up like all the cities in the world now, with skyscrapers and a universal kind of culture like the American culture.
And so, when you watch a film like Herzog's Into the Inferno, it's not just a film about volcanoes. What you really get is a story about the mythologies humans have created around them. When you watch God's Angry Man, you'll see the story of a man who could be easily turned into a caricature.
What is this but a festival of faith? What is faith but hanging on the impossible?
And yet, Herzog manages to peek beyond the mask.
Yeah, I almost cried a minute ago when you asked me
what I dream about. Misunderstanding is the pain. Everybody thinks I'm a fighter. Man, I hate to fight.
When you watch Herdsmen of the Sun, the strange courting rituals of the Wodabi tribe could have been an exercise in exoticism, were it not for Herzog's effort to humanize them and show that, beneath the outer layers of appearances, there is the same human soul shining through. And when you watch Cave of Forgotten Dreams, it's not the archaeological discovery of cave paintings that moves you, but the realization that our human spirit was already alive and burning with passion over 30,000 years ago. Herzog's lifelong dedication to capture and articulate our collective dreams has led to a filmography unlike any others. His work is filled with experiences of deep truth that illuminate and enlighten our own existence. They overcome us as those moments of ecstasy when, despite crossing continents and centuries, we find our brothers and sisters and instantly know that we are no longer alone.
My belief is that all these dreams are yours as well. And the only distinction between me and you is that I can articulate them. And that is what poetry or painting or literature or filmmaking is all about. It's as simple as that. And I make films because I have not learned anything else. And I know I can do it to a certain degree. And it is my duty, because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
In today's onslaught of empty consumption, offering infinite distraction on a magnitude that breaks even the best of us.
Have the monks stopped meditating? Have they stopped praying? They all seem to be tweeting.
The brave rebels in the war against television were struggling to find adequate images, to seek refuge in a place where meaningful stories were still honored. Fortunately, they found a safe haven at Mubi. Mubi is an online cinema streaming a hand-picked selection of films from around the globe. Every day they present a new film, and every day they take one away. Whether it's a timeless classic, a thought-provoking documentary, or an acclaimed masterpiece, there are always 30 perfectly curated films to discover. It's a simple but highly effective way to start exploring the riches of cinema, and I'm happy to share this with you by offering 30 days for free. So head on over to mubi.com/likestoriesofold to begin your extended free trial today.